Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Transit Database webinar for reduced reporters. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. As a disclaimer, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA's statutes and regulations for applicable National Transit Database requirements. This slide identifies the contact information you should use when you are unable to contact your assigned analyst, when you're having technical issues with the reporting system. The NTD reporting application support help desk is available from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. This help desk resource should be used as a resource to help with questions regarding requests across all FTA-specific applications and systems. So some reasons to contact this help desk would include login issues, system errors or bugs, or technical related assistance due to performance issues in the system. The non-technical NTD program support services are manned by an NTD analyst Monday through Friday between the hours of 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. This help desk service should be used as a resource to help with questions regarding how to report NTD data, questions or clarifications regarding NTD policy, or questions or clarifications regarding reporting requirements. Please note, you should only use this help desk when you are unable to reach your assigned analyst. And one important change that should be noted is that the 1888 NTD help desk number has been retired and is no longer in operation. So my name is Lee Lumpton, and I am joined here by Taisha Anderson, who will also be presenting today. Our contact information is listed here. Throughout this presentation, if you have any generalized questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button to ask your questions. If you have any questions that are specific to your agency, please hold on your question and reach out to your assigned analyst directly. This slide identifies FTA's program contacts. So Chelsea Champlin is the NTD Program Manager for the Office of Budget and Policy, and Tom Coleman is the Division Chief of Analysis for the Office of Budget and Policy. Here is the agenda for this afternoon. First, we will review the basic policies of NTD reporting, including a reporting overview, as well as touching on some policy clarifications and new updates for this year. Then we will discuss how to get started in the NTD reporting system, how to kick off and complete the annual report, as well as how to submit the report through the system. And then lastly, we will briefly review the validation and revision process. First, we will begin with an overview of the NTD and the reduced reporter module. So who reports to the NTD? Agencies that are recipients or beneficiaries of FTA 5307 Urbanized Area Formula Program funds or FTA 5311 Rural Area Formula Program funds are required to report to the NTD. Any recipients of FDA Chapter 53 funds are required to report to the NTD if they operate public transit. These agencies are public transportation providers that may include direct transit providers, state departments of transportation, and their subrecipients, as well as metropolitan planning organizations or MPOs. Transit agencies are welcome to report their public transit data to the NTD on a voluntary basis, even if they do not currently receive these funds. The data from these reports contributes to the apportionments for their urbanized areas or UZAs. Within the urban module of the NTD, reduced reporters are transit agencies who operate 30 or fewer vehicles in their peak maximum service. They also do not operate on any fixed guideway, such as rail or fixed catenary systems. For those who report as a reduced reporter, these agencies do not report data related to passenger miles in their service. They also do not report monthly service statistics or monthly safety data. Agencies have 4 months after their fiscal year ends to complete their NTD reports. For example, if your fiscal year ends on June 30th, the deadline for your submission is October 31st, and the report must be closed out or finalized by March 15th of the following year. We have 3 primary groups of fiscal year reporting deadlines listed here in this table. Next, we're going to cover what to report. Agencies must report all public transportation services, whether they are operated by your agency directly or contracted out as purchased transportation. Public transit must be regular, continuing, shared ride, and open to the public or a segment of the public, such as seniors or persons with disabilities. If you are required to report all assets, expenditures, and service data associated with these services. In your financial data, you should report the total annual cost of your service, regardless of whether it was federally or locally funded. And you should only report services for which your agency is responsible for covering the full cost. You must report data that is specific to each mode and type of service you operate, such as bus, demand response, van pull, and so on. Be sure to collect and report service and financial data by each individual mode. Additionally, you report actual data rather than data that is based on calculations or estimates. Report all direct as well as indirect expenses related to the service, also regardless of funding source. So this slide outlines the general flow of the NTD reporting process. The first, all agencies begin with reporting training and familiarizing themselves with the NTD policy manual. Agencies then compile and collect their data once the fiscal year ends. Next, they enter it into the NTD system and submit their first report. Your agency's assigned analysts will then review the data and send it back with revisions or requested clarifications. Once the report is finalized, it is sent to FDA for approval. The data will then be used in the apportionment formula funding in the next cycle associated with this report year. This data is eventually published to the NTD website for general public use. So there are some key reference documents available online. These include the Reduced Reporting Policy Manual. This document explains the reporting requirements and what should be reported. We have the Uniform System of Accounts, or the USOA. This document contains the accounting structure required by federal transit laws. We have the NTD Glossary, which provides definitions of terminology used within NTD. And lastly, we have the Transit Asset Management Guidebook. This document provides details for transit agencies in measuring and reporting TAM-related condition assessments. These can all be found on the link provided on this slide. Next, we will discuss the updates and clarifications for the 2024 report year. So these clarifications and updates include a clarification to the zip file requirements for the GTFS link on the P50 form. They also include the geospatial data questions on the B15 form and update and clarification to those. Additionally, on the A30 form, we will have a clarification on how agencies should report seating capacity, as well as a few updates regarding the mileage information section of the A30 form. In addition to those previously mentioned, we also have an update on the RR20 form that provides information on how agencies should split data in different circumstances. Agencies will also now see a GTFS confirmation selection on the D10 form to confirm the currently uploaded GTF link is correct and explain why it is not, if that is applicable. Another one of these updates includes the ability to view the prior year's data for each form. There will be a new button within each form allowing users to download a PDF of the prior year's form. And then lastly, as a friendly reminder, we want to be checking and confirming the unique entity ID, or the UEID, each year to ensure that it is correct for each agency. And the NTD has provided some tooltips throughout the forms to serve as guidance for agencies when completing the forms. We're going to dive into each of these clarifications and updates in the next couple of slides. So for report year 2024, the NTD has made a few updates to the P50 GTFS form. The P50 form was new to the NTD in report year 2023 and is only applicable to agencies who report a fixed route mode. Starting in report year 2024, all links should provide a direct download of the GTFS dataset zip file. These links must be persistent, machine readable, and not password protected. If an agency has multiple modes included in their GTFS link, they can use the same link for those modes on the P50 form. For agencies that need assistance in building their GTFS link, Rural Transit Assistance Program, or RTAP for short, is a great resource for assistance with creating the GTFS feed. We have included a link to their GTFS builder here on the slide. RTAP also offers live support for GTFS on Thursdays between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So during report year 2023, the NTD also implemented the B15 form. This form focuses on geospatial data for demand response modes and is therefore only applicable to agencies that report a demand response service. There has been an update made to the age or disability label in question 8 on this form from the prior year. The label previously reading age or disability will now read age or disability or low income to account for services like Medicaid. Agencies should select yes or no on the form to note whether or not they provide service that is restricted to elderly, disabled, or low income riders. Now in Report Year 2024, the NTD has implemented some clarifications to the questions on the B15 as well. We will go over those clarifications on the next couple of slides. But first, question 8 on the form should be filled out based on the hours of operation and the restrictions of your service. The overall question we are answering in question 8 is for each day of the week, what are your hours of operation? And is your service restricted to complimentary paratransit eligible riders, restricted by age or disability, or open to the general public? To answer this question, start by listing the days of the week your demand response service operates. Then you will list the hours for each day your service operates. And lastly, you will list your demand response services. Please note one demand response service may operate multiple services, and you should report the eligibility requirements for each of those services. You should only report yes to multiple categories when your demand response service encompasses multiple services that have different eligibility requirements. Diving more into the different eligibilities, you can see from this table the 3 different eligibilities question 8 addresses. You should select yes for the complimentary paratransit eligibility if you operate a service that is intended to meet the ADA complimentary paratransit requirement for a fixed route service and which is restricted to persons your agency has found eligible for paratransit service. For age, disability, or low income, you should select yes if you operate a service that is restricted to elderly, disabled, or low income riders, but is not intended to meet the ADA complimentary paratransit requirement for a fixed route service. And lastly, for general population, you should select yes if you operate a service that has no eligibility restrictions. As stated prior, an agency can select yes to multiple eligibilities if their demand response service has multiple services that meet these criteria. For question 9 on the B15, we are answering what is the minimum advanced reservation time for your demand response services. For this selection, you can choose between days or hours based on how your system operates. If you require passengers to reserve their trip by a certain cutoff time the day before the trip, you should report 1 day. If different services within the demand response mode have different advanced reservation requirements, report the shortest minimum advanced reservation time. For question 10 on the B15, we are looking to answer what is the fare charge for your demand response services. If your agency's fares vary, please report the most commonly charged passenger fare. Do not include any discounts or donations. If your agency is looking for any assistance in training staff and complying with the new reporting requirements, please feel free to reach out to the National Rural Transit Assistance Program. We will be sure to go over all these questions on the B15 form later on in the presentation, but as always, please use the tooltips and be sure to reach out to your assigned analyst if you have any questions when completing the form. The next couple of updates we have to go will be reporting on the A30 Revenue Vehicle Inventory Form. The A30 form houses the information related to the vehicles an agency uses in revenue service. For report year 24 and future report years, agencies should report the full potential seating capacity on the A30 form for vehicles with the capacity to add more seats as needed. For example, the vehicle may have a potential seating capacity of 15, but may only have 12 seats installed. The agency should report a seating capacity of 15 on the A30 form. This way, the agency will not have to update the form every time they add or remove seats. The first update to the form allows the users to view the prior reported year mileage in the mileage information section. This will only apply to RVI IDs that were on the NTD report in the prior year and have the same number of active vehicles as the prior year. The next update to the A30 form is the implementation of the recalculate button for the average lifetime miles calculation. This is a helpful feature for reporting average lifetime miles correctly year over year, as it takes the information an agency reported in the prior year and the information reported in the mileage information section on the current report year and does the calculation for the agency. This function is also only available for RVIDs that were on the NTD report in the prior year and have the same number of active vehicles as the prior year. The last update made to the A30 form for the report year 2024 is a retire vehicle notice. A pop-up prompt will occur when the user changes the number of active vehicles for an RVID to 0 and asks the user if they would like to retire the fleet. The retired radio button has also been moved to be more visible on the form and is now located next to the active vehicles line item. Another quick clarification to the report package forms is on the RR20 form and deals with data splitting. If agency A and agency B have an agreement that agency A will operate Route 1, serving both areas, and agency B will operate Route 2, serving both areas, then agency A may report Route 1 and agency B may report Route 2. However, agencies may not split individual vehicle trips between NTD reports. If a rider boards service that is in agency A's report, then the entire trip must be in agency A's report. For demand response services, if agency A's passengers and agency B's passengers are on the same vehicle at the same time, agencies may not split the data between reports. Instead, the agency operating the service must report it. If you have specific questions about data splitting, please contact your assigned analyst to review your specific case, and they can help determine the best way to report in accordance with the NTD policy manual. The FFA 10 forms will now be restricted, and agencies will not be allowed to access these forms until their B15, if applicable, and RR20 forms are saved and validated. This will help cut down on the number of times an agency will need to input data into the FFA 10 forms, as this form pulls data from the other forms. The FFA 10 form separates out the agency's data across the UZAs that the agency operates in. Agencies will not be able to click into the FFA 10 form until they have input data into the RR20 form, and we will talk more in depth about the FFA 10 form later on in the presentation. And our last update for the 2024 report year is on the D10 form and includes a new certification to complete. The CEOs will now need to certify that the GTFS web links that were previously reported are up to date as of the time of certification. Agencies may need to reach out to whoever maintains their GTFS link for this information. If an agency cannot certify that the link is up to date, they should select no and provide an explanation as to why they are not up to date. For all annual report package forms, there will now be a view previous year data button at the top of each form that allows agencies to generate a copy of that form from the previous year. This should allow agencies to compare year-to-year data in an easier fashion than navigating to the form library where the whole report package from all previous years is stored. And then again, as another friendly reminder, NTD agencies may have a unique entity ID or UEID number that they need to either update or confirm is still accurate for their agency. Agencies should confirm their UEID is correct each report year. And lastly, our last reminder before we jump into the reporting system and report package is another friendly reminder. The NTD has multiple tooltips placed on the forms throughout the report package that will help agencies better understand the data field in question. You can currently find tooltips on the B15, A10, A30, A90, D10, and P50 forms. To use the tooltip, hover your cursor over the tooltip icon for the detailed description of what that specific data point is looking for. Now we will cover the NTD reporting system. So this is the NTD homepage. For those who aren't familiar, it can be found at www.transit.dot.gov/NTD. There are two links on this page that will allow you to access the reporting system, both on the left-hand side of the page and are noted by the red arrows on this slide. Once you log in, you will land on the home screen and you will be able to set a default system by clicking on the star. Any announcements from the NTD will also be displayed here at the top. From the home screen, you can access or navigate your agency's annual report and your agency's profile by clicking on the home button at the top left of the page. The agency profile section is a frequently accessed part of this NTD system. This houses data that typically does not change year to year, such as your basic information, the modes that your agency operates, the users on your NTD profile, and it also allows you to access historical reports in the previous year's report. You can access the profile by clicking the Home tab at the top of the page, then clicking on Profile. Next, you will see a link to your agency's NTD ID number, which is a link that will take you to your profile. When you click on the link, you will then land on the profile summary page. This page contains your analyst's name, phone number, and email address, as well as your agency's basic information. At the top of the profile section, you will see several different tabs. Two of the most frequently used tabs are the eFile tab and the Form Library tab. The eFile library contains historical requests like extension requests or agency fiscal year updates. The Form Library contains your agency's reports from previous years. If you need to access the 2023 report for reference while completing the 2024 report, you should do this through the Form Library. Another tab you will find on the profile is the Related Actions tab. This tab allows you to edit your agency's profile information like your basic information, modes, or users. There may be times during one report year or another that you need to edit your modes. To do this, you'll select the Related Actions tab from the profile and then select View and Manage Reporter Modes link for the P20 form. If you'd like to add a new mode to your agency profile, select Add Mode at the bottom of the screen. Please note you will not need to add the same mode over year, as this data will be retained in the system. When adding a new mode, you will be required to enter the following information. You will first select the mode from a drop-down menu such as bus, demand response, etc. Next, you will select whether the service is directly operated by your agency or contracted out as purchased transportation. Next, you will enter the commitment date, which is when your agency first committed capital funds towards the mode. You will then enter the start date, which is the first day of revenue service. Please note, do not enter an end date if the service is still in operation. Only enter an end date if the service has been terminated. Please note that agencies cannot delete modes from the profile once they have been added. You may edit modes directly in this form by selecting the field you wish to update. You may add an end date if the service has ceased operations or update the commitment or start dates as needed. And lastly, we will review the user roles for agency users in the NTD system. The user roles are as follows. We have the CEO or CEO delegate, if applicable, NTD contact, editor, and viewer. CEOs and CEO delegates have the highest level of access and permissions in the system, including the ability to create reporter requests, like waiver or extension requests. CEOs have the ability to submit the report as well as view and edit report forms and issues. The CEO delegate role is optional for all agencies and requires FTA approval. The NTD contacts have the same permissions as CEOs aside from creating reporter requests and submitting the original submission or first draft of the report. Editors may only revise and save forms while viewers may only view the forms, and the limit for both editors and viewers on a single profile is 19. Next, we're going to dive into starting the report year. And the first step in completing the annual report is completing the report year kickoff. This process officially launches the current report year. After your fiscal year ends, your agency CEO and NTD contact will receive a task in the system to complete the kickoff. This process will generate the report package for the year after you confirm your agency's information. So first, the CEO or NTD contact will select the Tasks tab. You will then need to select the 2025 report year kickoff task to begin the process of generating your 2024 report package forms. Once you select the 2025 report year kickoff task, you will need to accept the task and then select Proceed. The first step in this process is confirming or editing your agency's users. For the year, you can add users or edit existing contact information as needed. The next step is confirming or editing your agency's mode for the year or multiple modes. You can add new modes if you started a new service or end modes if your service has ceased operations in the past year. The next step is managing your 2024 Transit Asset Management Group Plan sponsor. If you are participating in a group transit asset management plan, you confirm your sponsor from 2023. If you're completing your own transit asset management plan, you can simply click continue. If you need to remove the sponsor from last year or select a new one, please contact your analyst. Next, you will either update or input the emergency contact information by clicking on the Go to P10 form button, or you will confirm the already inputted information is correct. Next, you'll confirm the reporter type for 2024. If you were a small systems reporter last year, ensure that no is selected under change type, as your reporter type will not be changing. If you accidentally revise your reporter type to the incorrect type, don't worry, your analyst can revert you back to the correct reporter type. Select the same answer for your 2025 reporter type, then select submit to complete the report year kickoff. And again, if you accidentally revise your reporter type to the incorrect type for 2024 or 2025, don't worry, your analyst can revert you back to the correct reporter type. So this will generate your 2024 report package forms. The system typically takes a couple of minutes to complete this function, so be sure to check your forms after allowing a little time. We will now review the annual form navigation. So to access your 2024 report package, first select Home at the top of the page and then select Annual. Do not select the 2025 report package, as this is the wrong reporting package for this year's NTD report. Then you'll select the 2024 package link. Once the report package summary page opens, select Annual Forms in the top right-hand corner. This will open the list of report package forms, and you can select any form link to open whichever form you plan to work on. This is the list of forms you'll see in your report package, which we will review one by one throughout this presentation. The first form in each report package is the B10 form, or the B10 identification form. When completing the B10 form, the first step is to select your agency's organization type from the drop-down menus. Examples of available organization types include, but are not limited to, city, county, or local government unit, or independent public agency or authority of transit service, universities, and area agency on aging. After you have selected your agency's organization type, you will report your demographic information. This includes service area square miles, and service area population. The data points for service area should represent your agency's true service area for transit and not the data for your specific urbanized area. To complete your demographic information, you will report data related to your urbanized area, or UZA. Your primary UZA will be pre-populated in the form. You can add secondary urbanized areas as applicable by clicking the Add UZA button. If your agency has any modes that will be filing separately or has service that is captured in another NTD report, you will report them in the Modes Filing Separately section. If this does not apply to your agency, please leave this section blank. Please contact your analyst before adding any new modes filing separately on this form. Lastly, if your agency owns capital assets that are used in another NTD reporter service, you will be required to report the agency and modes where these assets are used in the separate assets section of the B10 form. Again, if this does not apply to your agency, please leave this section blank. So next, we will cover the B15 geographic area coverage form. As a reminder, this form will only appear in your report if you operate a demand response mode. For each demand response mode and type of service combination, you will respond to 10 questions in this form. The questions will be dynamic based on your selection to the previous questions. We will review each of the 10 questions through screenshots of the report form. So question 1 asks if you serve residents in another state besides your state. Select yes or no. Question 2 allows you to select the counties that your agency serves, either in whole or in part. You should start by selecting add, after which you can choose your state and report the counties. Question 3 allows you to select the census designated places, or CDPs, that are served in these counties. The Census Bureau's Tiger Web application allows you to view census designated places within your county or county is selected. We encourage you to review this resource. You can then select the service level by indicating whether the census places are wholly served or partially served. Question 4 asks if any portion of your demand response service is intended to meet the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, complementary paratransit requirements for a fixed route mode. Select yes or no. If you select yes, question 5 asks if your service area is limited to your own NTD. If it is, select yes. If the ADA service serves other NTD reporters, select no. If you select no, you should search for and select all other NTD IDs that your ADA service covers. Question 6 asks if you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service. Select yes or no. Question 7 asks which days per week you operate, for which you should select the applicable checkboxes. When you are done, select Create Days of the Week on the right-hand side of this page, which will populate question 8. For question 8, you will report the service begin and end time for each day. You will also answer basic questions about these services as seen in the column headers under question 8 shown in the screenshot. Question 9 asks for the minimum advanced reservation time for your service. Enter the numeric minimum, then indicate whether that number corresponds to days or hours. And finally, question 10 asks for the fair charge for this service. You should not include donations in this field. We do understand that this is a new form, so we encourage you to contact your analyst if you have any questions about the reporting requirements for the B15 form. Next, we will cover the B30 contractual relationship form. The B30 form captures information about contractual relationships. These are relationships where transit service is provided to an agency or government unit from a public or private transportation provider based on a written contract. There are two types of contractual positions, the buyer and the seller. The buyer of service will be the transit agency that pays another entity to perform service. Please note, if the buyer of the service only pays a portion of the cost to operate the service, it should not be reported as a contract. The seller of the service will be the entity that provides service on behalf of another agency. The seller may be a public or private entity. The NTD has specific criteria for service that may be reported as a contract. The criteria are as follows. There should be an existing written agreement that outlines the following. Number 1, obligates the seller to provide operations for a specific monetary consideration. Number 2, specifies a contractual relationship for a certain time period and service. Number 3, obligates the seller to provide to the buyer the operating statistics required by the NTD annual report. And number 4, the authorized representatives of both the buyer and the seller sign the written agreement. Please note, buyers must pay the full cost of the service in order to report the service as a contract to the NTD. Also, the service must be branded under the transit agency buying the service. To add a B30 form to your report package, you will click the Add Contractual Relationship button at the top of your report package summary dashboard. All B30s from previous report years will generate during the report year kickoff as part of your report package. Once you have selected Add Contractual Relationship, the next step is to select whether the contractual relationship is with another agency who reports to the NTD or is a private company. Then you will click Continue. If your B30 is with another NTD reporter, you must select the contracted agency from a list generated by the NTD database. You can also search for the provider in the search bar. At the top of the B30 form is the contract summary. The first selection you must make is your contractual position. This indicates whether your agency is the buyer of service or the seller of service. Once you have selected your position, you will report whether the contract was negotiated or competitively bid. This should refer to when the contract was awarded, even if the option years have been exercised. Then you will select the primary feature of the contract, or how does the buyer compensate the seller. There are two options here. The buyer pays the seller a negotiated fixed rate per unit of service, or the buyer reimburses the seller's net operating expenses based on an approved budget. You will select one of these options from the drop-down menu. Next, you will indicate whether the service statistics will be reported in your NTD report or in another NTD report. If you're reporting the service data in your own NTD report, select in this report. If another NTD reporting agency will be capturing the service data provided in the contract, select in another report. In the next step, you will indicate whether the seller keeps the fares or the seller returns the fares to the fares collected to the buyer. The last selection for the contract summary is to indicate any public assets provided to the seller by the buyer, if applicable. These may be vehicles, maintenance facilities, or other public assets. If you select other, you will be required to provide a description of the public assets provided. The next section of the B30 form is where you will add each mode provided as part of the contract. These modes do not carry over from year to year and must be added to your B30 form for each new report year. Please note you may only add active modes from your P20 form or modes listed as filing separate on your B10. You will click the Add New Mode button and Type of Service button at the bottom left of the form to add modes. Then you'll select the appropriate mode and type of service from the drop-down menu and click Edit on the right-hand column to open up the Key Financial and Operation Statistics field. So we'll now take a look at the Key Financial and Operating Statistics section. First, you'll report the number of vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs. This should represent the highest number of vehicles operated at any given point during the year. This excludes special events or atypical service days. Then you will indicate how many months the seller provided service during the report year. Next, you'll report the amount of fare revenues generated by the service. You should report the total amount of fares collected, regardless of whether the buyer or seller retains the fares. Then you will report the total payment to the contractor in the direct payment line. This should be the total amount paid directly from the buyer to the seller without netting any capital leasing or other expenses. Next, you will indicate the amount of capital leasing expenses for the contract. Capital leasing costs are expenses that the seller charges the buyer for the use of its capital assets, such as vehicles or maintenance facilities. If the buyer provides all the assets, this does not apply. Next, if you're the buyer of service, you will record any cost your agency incurs for overseeing the contract under the other operating expenses incurred by the buyer field. This should include general administration costs to oversee the contract and any other applicable expenses. And then finally, you will report any lease and or rental expenses in the other reconciling item expenses incurred by the buyer field. An example of this would be vehicle rentals. So the next form we will review is the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. On this form, you will begin by reporting data on your agency's passenger stations. You will report the number of ADA accessible and non-accessible stations, as well as the number of elevators and escalators in your stations. Passenger stations must be significant structures in separate rights of way in order to be reportable. Please note bus stops or bus shelters do not count as passenger stations. And if you have any questions regarding what constitutes a station or maintenance facility, please contact your analyst. So next, you will report a count of your agency's maintenance facilities used to support revenue service. This will include any owned or leased maintenance facilities. You will report the facilities by ownership type, facility type, and capacity. If your agency uses one maintenance facility for multiple modes, you will need to prorate that facility based on the number of vehicles it serves. For example, if an agency operates a demand response mode and a bus mode that uses the same maintenance facility, this facility will need to be prorated between the A10 forms for each mode. The example provided shows a garage services 10 vehicles total, 4 motor bus vehicles, and 6 demand response vehicles. The bus A10 form would reflect 0.4 or 40% of the facility. The demand response A10 form would reflect 0.6 or 60% of the facility. And this is determined by taking the number of vehicles for each mode and dividing by the number of total vehicles for all modes. And with that, I will turn it over to Taisha, who will take us to the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Lee. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So we will now talk about the Transit Asset Management Inventory, or A15 form. In the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory, or A15 form, you will report all administrative facilities for which you have capital replacement responsibility and the use is greater than incidental. You will also report all passenger facilities that your agency uses in revenue service, regardless of capital responsibility. Capital responsibility is defined as an asset that your agency jointly owns with another entity, or an asset that your agency is responsible for replacing, overhauling, refurbishing, or conducting major repairs on, or the cost of these activities is itemized as a capital line item in your agency's budget. Incidental use is defined as 50% or less of the facility's physical space being dedicated to public transportation services. A few common examples of facility types on the A15 form are administrative buildings, which are the offices that house executive management and supporting activities for transit operations, combined administrative and maintenance facilities, which are facilities that combine the functions of both an administrative and maintenance facility. And lastly, maintenance facilities. These are facilities where routine and heavy maintenance on vehicles is performed. When adding a new facility to the A15 form, you should complete all required fields. We will review all of the required fields shortly. To get started, you will click Add New. Please note existing facility information will pre-populate from the previous report year, so you should only add new facilities or update the information for existing facilities as needed. There are 3 sections that have to be completed for each facility: facility information, condition assessment, and address. To complete these sections, select the Add New Facility button at the bottom, followed by Add Facility. This will allow you to begin entering data for that facility. Again, these sections have to be completed for each facility. In other words, if you are adding multiple facilities, you should repeat this process. We encourage you to review the NTD policy manual and/or work with your assigned validation analyst if you have specific questions. There are agencies that do not have any reportable facilities. If this applies to your agency, you should select the box beside No Data to Report before clicking on Save and Validate. Now we will review the Revenue Vehicle Inventory, or A30 form. Each report year, the A30 form will pre-populate all revenue vehicle fleets from the previous report year that were not retired. However, you should review this information. During your review, if you need to add new vehicles, you will click on the Add New Fleet button. First, you will report the basic information about the fleet. This includes the vehicle type, total vehicles, active fleet vehicles, ownership type, funding type, and whether or not the fleet is a dedicated fleet. Fields with an asterisk are required. Fields without an asterisk are optional. If your agency has an internal identifier, you can enter this into the agency fleet ID field. If you would like to add any notes to help you in the next report year, or that your agency has internally, you can use the notes field. Please note, fleet should be grouped together by vehicles that are identical across all fields. In the next few slides, we will review the fields under the basic information section. You must report the vehicle type for each fleet by selecting the correct option under the drop-down menu. For total vehicles, you will report all vehicles in the fleet. Active vehicles should include all vehicles that are available to provide service, including spares. Ownership type is also a required field with the drop-down menu. Options include owned or leased vehicles and whether or not the vehicles are owned or leased by a public agency or private entity. Funding type is a required field with the drop-down menu. From here, you will select the largest funding source for that vehicle. For example, FTA grant programs, other federal funds, or non-federal funds. If you do not have capital replacement responsibility, which we discussed during the A15 form, you should select this box. This is not a required field and only applies if your agency is not responsible for maintenance and/or replacement. Automated or autonomous vehicles is an optional field that was added in the last few report years. This only applies to a small number of agencies who have vehicles that do not require human input to operate. After the basic information, you will enter the vehicle information. This includes the fleet's model, vehicle length, and seating and standing capacity. These fields require manual input. You will also enter the fuel type, manufacturer, and year rebuild. If the vehicle type is a cutaway, it is likely the vehicle has two manufacturer model combinations. You should report the manufacturer model combination of the body of the vehicle, which is where the passengers sit. The year of manufacture is the year in which the vehicle was made, not the model year. Please note, if your agency reports a year rebuild, you will be required to indicate the type of rebuild that was performed. The last editable field in the vehicle information section is useful life benchmark, or ULB. This is the expected life cycle or acceptable period of which use in service for an asset as determined by your agency or default benchmark provided by FTA. If your agency determines the useful life benchmark, it should be based on your operating environment, including your location, the frequency of your service, and your climate. Useful life benchmark is not the same as useful life for FTA grant programs. For FTA grant programs, useful life is typically defined as the minimum age at which equipment can be retired. When you add a new fleet, the useful life benchmark will pre-populate after you select the vehicle type. This will pre-populate with the default provided by FTA. Please double check to ensure this is accurate if your agency determines your useful life benchmark. In the screenshot, you will see an example of the useful life benchmark defaulted to the benchmark determined by FTA. The vehicle type selected was bus, and the default benchmark determined by FTA for buses is 14 years. Again, if your agency determines your useful life benchmarks and does not use FTA's defaults, then you should double check this. Once you report the year manufactured, useful life remaining will automatically populate. In this example, the bus fleet was manufactured in 2015 and has been in service for 8 years. The agency in this example used the default benchmark determined by FTA, which again is 14 years. When you do the math and subtract 8 from 14, you get 6. This means there are 6 years of useful life remaining. Since this is an auto-populated field, you cannot edit it. If you need to make changes, you should either revise the year of manufacture or the useful life benchmark. The final section on the A30 form is called mileage information. In this section, you will report miles this year and average lifetime miles. Miles this year refers to the total miles each fleet was driven during your fiscal year. Average lifetime miles are the average mileage on active vehicles. Please be aware that this mileage is from the date of manufacture. As of last year, report year 23, average lifetime miles auto-calculates. The calculation is done using the average lifetime miles from the previous year and the value reported for miles this year in the current report year. You do have the option to override the calculation if it is incorrect. Sometimes agencies need to edit an existing fleet. To do so, you should click on the RVI ID. To clarify, you will click on the numbers, not the heading that says RVI ID. This will cause the basic information, vehicle information, and mileage information to display so you can make the necessary updates. Please note you may need to scroll down to the bottom of the page to see these sections. If your agency shares fleets between two or more modes, The fleet should be reported on both A30 forms. Since the A30 form is broken up by mode and type of service. If this applies to your agency, you should click on Add Existing Fleet. The system will populate all fleets that may be shared between modes. There's a red X in the right-hand corner, in the right-hand column on the A30 form for each fleet. Oftentimes, this is misused. You should only click the X when you have added a fleet in error. If a fleet is no longer in use, it should be retired. To do so, you should click on the RVI ID and scroll down to the bottom of your screen. Under Basic Information, you should change the total vehicles and active vehicles to 0. Once you have done so, a question will populate that asks, is this fleet retired? You should select yes. If the fleet is in storage, retained for emergency contingency purposes, out of service for an extended period of time awaiting repairs, awaiting sale or disposal, or maintained for special events only, it should be listed as inactive. To do so, you will click on the RVI ID and scroll down to the bottom of your screen. Under the Basic Information section, you will change active vehicles to 0. Now we will review the Service Vehicle Inventory or A35 form. NTD requires agencies to report all service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Sometimes agencies hear the word service and confuse which vehicles should be reported on the A35 form. Service vehicles are non-revenue vehicles. Examples include administration staff vehicles, transit police cars, tow trucks, and service trucks. If your agency has a vehicle that is not roadworthy, such as a small forklift or a golf cart, it should not be reported. We will also cover how to add service vehicle fleets to your A30 form. First, you will click Add New. Once you click on Add New, you will need to scroll down to the bottom of the screen and you will see a section that says Update Service Fleet Information. In this section, you will find the fleet name, agency fleet ID, primary mode, secondary mode, total vehicles, useful life benchmark, year manufactured, notes, total agency capital responsibility, estimated costs, and year dollars of estimated costs. We covered the majority of these categories while discussing the A30 form. However, it is important to note a distinct difference: the vehicle type. For service vehicles, there are 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber tire vehicles, steel wheel vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Automobiles include vehicles that are up to a station wagon in size. Minivans, SUVs, and anything larger should be reported as trucks and other rubber tire vehicles. It is important to note on the A35 form, the vehicle type is automobiles, which is plural. On the A30 form, it is automobile, which is singular. 2 other differences between the A30 and the A35 forms are the estimated costs and year dollars of estimated costs. The estimated cost should be the most recent estimated cost to replace that fleet. If you do not have an estimate, you should report the original cost of the fleet. Year dollars of estimated cost should be the year that corresponds to the estimate reported for estimated costs. For example, if your most recent estimate was in 2023, you would report 2023 as the year's dollars of estimated costs. Not every agency will have service vehicles for which they have capital responsibility. If your agency does not, you will click the box beside No Data to report. Now we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets, or A90 form. On the A90 form, you should report targets for your asset performance for the upcoming report year, not the current report year we are in. For example, in report year 2024, you should report performance targets for report year 2025. The form will auto-calculate performance targets you entered from the previous report year with actual data from your A30 or A35 form. To clarify, performance targets should be the percentage of vehicles that will meet or exceed useful life benchmark, and or for facilities, the percentage of facilities that have a condition assessment below 3. If you have a group plan sponsor, this form will be read only as they complete the form on your behalf and for all of their participants. On this slide, the first column represents 3 categories you have on your A90 form. The first category is rolling stock and represents your revenue vehicles. The second category is equipment and represents your service vehicles. Again, for both revenue and service vehicles, performance target should be the percentage of vehicles that will meet or exceed their useful life benchmark. The third category is facilities. Again, the performance target for facilities should be the percentage of facilities that have a condition assessment below 3. There is a fourth section, but since your agency is a reduced reporter, that section does not apply to you. For your awareness, that section is infrastructure and covers the percentage of track miles under performance restrictions. This slide and the next 2 slides are a recap of each section. Again, the first section is rolling stock. This is for your revenue vehicles that are reported on the A30 form. This section does populate vehicle types based on the modes you reported. However, the form does not know whether all vehicle types apply to your agency. If a vehicle type does not apply, you will check the box under NA or not applicable. The equipment section is for your is for your service vehicles that are reported on the A35 form. This includes automobiles, trucks, and other rubber tire vehicles. Again, if a vehicle type does not apply, you will check the box under NA. Going back to the distinction between automobiles, which is plural, and if your agency has a validation issue that discusses automobiles, make sure you note whether or not the word is plural. A lot of times that causes some confusion with agencies. And that will tell you, again, if it's plural, it's talking about section 2 under equipment. If it's singular, it's talking about your rolling stock or section 1. The facility section is for your facilities that are used in revenue service, such as your passenger parking facilities and/or facilities used to support revenue service, such as your administrative maintenance facilities. Similar to the first 2 sections, if a facility does not apply, you check the box under NA. At the bottom of your A90 form, you will need to upload your narrative report. If your agency is not part of another agency's TAM plan, the narrative report is required. This report should outline your performance targets and your agency's progress towards those targets. The report should also include any changes in your agency's condition that may affect the progress towards the targets. Now we will talk about the reduced reporting or RR20 form. In the first section of the RR20 form, you will report financial data. And in the second section, you will report service data. The financial data is broken into 4 subsections that we will cover in the next few slides. In the first section, funds expended, you will report the total funds expended on operations and on capital by each mode and type of service. This should include all funds expended on your transit service during the fiscal year. In the second section, fair revenue, you will report the total fair revenue expended on operations and on capital by each mode and type of service. This should include all income received for passengers, but not exclusively from passengers. As you can see in the screenshot, there are passenger paid fares, which are fares paid directly by the passenger, and organization paid fares, which are fares paid by an organization for a passenger. Types of fare revenue include cash or prepaid tickets, reduced or subsidized fares, or donations that are made on board the revenue vehicle. In the third section, other directly generated funds, you will report the total other directly generated funds expended on operations and capital. Unlike previous sections, this is not separated by mode and type of service. Examples include advertising or concession revenue, fundraisers, park and ride revenue, and interest on investments. Please note, if you do report any other directly generated funds, you must describe them. Just saying other directly generated funds is not a description. In the fourth section, revenues accrued through a purchase transportation agreement, you will report the total revenues accrued through a purchase transportation agreement expended on operations and capital. This section is also not separated by mode and type of service, but because it is revenues accrued through a purchase transportation agreement, purchase transportation types of service are the only ones that qualify. You will report the revenues if you are the seller of the service or the operator of contracted service. Again, the purchase transportation agreement must meet the NTD definition of a purchase transportation service that Lee covered earlier. In the fifth section, non-federal funds, you will report the total non-federal funds expended on operations and capital. This includes local, state, and other non-federal funds. Again, if you report other funds, you have to describe them. Please also note this section is not separated by mode or type of service. The sixth section is federal funds. This is the last funding section and slightly longer as it covers all the federal funding programs. In this section, you will report federal funds expended on operations and capital. Again, this is not separated by mode and type of service. Please note, in order to report the federal program, you will have to select it. Once you have selected the applicable federal program, you can report the funds under the specific federal program. For example, if you receive CARES, CRESA, or ARP funding, you will expand the 5307 program and find the CARES, CRESA, or ARP line item. Please note, CARES, CRESA, and ARP funding should not be reported as extraordinary and special items. It is also worth noting ARP, or American Rescue Plan, and ARA are not the same. If you received other USDOT or other federal funds, you will report them under other. Similar to other funding sections that we discussed previously, if you do report funding here, you will be required to describe the original source of funds. For example, Federal Highway Administration, Medicaid, etc. The final section of the R20 form is the annual service data. In this section, you will report annual vehicle revenue miles, or VRM, annual vehicle revenue hours, or VRH, annual unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, which includes sponsored UPT if you have demand response service, and vehicles operated in maximum service, or BOMS. Now we will discuss the definition of revenue service. VRM and VRH includes the miles and hours when a vehicle is in revenue service and layover and/or recovery time. It does not include deadhead, operator training, school bus or charter services, or vehicle maintenance testing. In this slide, you will see a table that illustrates what is considered revenue service, both miles and hours for demand response. For example, when the vehicle departs the dispatching point to pick up a passenger, this is not considered revenue miles or hours. This is deadhead. However, in the third row in the table, when a vehicle arrives at the pickup point and waits for a passenger, it is considered vehicle revenue hours, or VRH. The next table outlines examples of revenue service for the bus mode. When a bus is traveling on its route during scheduled revenue service, this would be considered vehicle revenue hours and revenue miles, even if passengers do not board the vehicle. The key here is that the bus is traveling en route during scheduled service. On the fourth row, there's an example of deadhead. Once the bus arrives at the end of the route, deadheads back to the storage lot to park, it is not considered revenue service. You can reference both of these tables for demand response and bus in the policy manual beginning on page 77. Unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, represents the total number of boardings for your agency during the fiscal year. It is important to note that the word unlinked. These trips are not linked, which means every time a passenger boards, it should be counted as one UPT. Now we will discuss some common validation issues with service data. The first is reporting scheduled hours or available service hours instead of actual revenue hours. You should report actual vehicle revenue hours, or VRH, not scheduled hours. For example, if your agency is available for service from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 12 hours, but you only provide service for 8 of those 12 hours, you would report 8. The second common example is not properly classifying expenses. A common example of misclassifying is passenger paid and organization paid fares. Page 61 of the policy manual discusses the difference. The third common validation error is reporting vehicle revenue miles, or VRM, based on average route distance. Agencies are required to track actual revenue miles and not calculate an estimate. Lastly, the fourth common validation issue is including deadhead in revenue service. Agencies should not include deadhead in VRH or deadhead hours, in VRH, or deadhead miles in VRM. As a reminder, deadhead includes the time and miles while leaving the garage to go to the first point of revenue service, returning to the garage from the last point of revenue service, or anytime the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. If you have any questions about what to include in your service totals, please contact your assigned validation analyst for further guidance. Now we will look at the safety data, or SNS 60 form. This form was new in report year 2023. Previously, there was a safety data section at the bottom of the RR20 form, but that section has been removed, so you will no longer see the old incidents, injuries, and fatalities field on the RR20 form. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, requires the NTD to collect data related to assaults on transit workers. The BIL defines assaults on transit workers as a circumstance in which an individual knowingly, without lawful authority or permission, and with intent to endanger the safety of any individual, or with reckless disregard for the safety of human life, interferes with, disables, or incapacitates a transit worker while the transit worker is performing their duties. NTD requires agencies to report all assaults on transit workers, regardless of injury. Assaults can be classified into two categories: physical and non-physical. Physical assaults involve physical contact with the transit worker and can include any contact with the attacker's body, a weapon, a projectile, or another item. Physical assaults can include the assailant's saliva as well. Non-physical assaults do not involve any physical contact and can include threats, intimidation, or interfering with the worker's duties. Reportable events occur on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility or maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle and meets reporting thresholds. For a safety event to be reportable, it must meet a reporting threshold, which include the following: a fatality confirmed within 30 days of the event, an injury requiring immediate medical attention away from the scene for one or more persons, property damage exceeding or equal to $25,000, collisions involving transit revenue vehicles that require towing away from the scene for a transit vehicle or non-transit vehicle, or an evacuation of a transit facility or vehicle for life safety reasons. You should exclude events that occur at bus stops or bus shelters that are not on transit-owned property unless it involves boarding or alighting or involving a transit vehicle. You should also exclude events that occur off transit property where the affected persons come to rest on transit property after the event. One key update to safety reporting is that agencies must report additional details regarding bus collision fatalities. Agencies previously reported these types of events, but only reported a count of injuries or a count of fatalities as general safety incidents. They did not specify whether the injury or fatality resulted in impact with the bus. The SNS 60 form will provide fields for additional event types, including collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, or collisions with an other category, which can include an animal or manhole. There's also a field for other major events, which are safety events that meet one of the reporting thresholds mentioned earlier, but are not specifically one of the collision types listed above. Fires are one example of major event types. If there's a fire on transit property that results in an injury or property damage exceeding $25,000, you would report that here. Finally, there's a field where you report injuries from non-major events. We would encourage you to contact your analyst if you have any questions about this field. Here you will see a screenshot of the SNS 60 form that depicts the physical assaults and non-physical assault sections. The columns represented in the various location types where assaults may happen. The options are physical assaults in transit vehicle, physical assaults in revenue facility, physical assaults in non-revenue facility, and physical assaults in other location. The rows represent the total event count for major safety and security events and non-major events. For all injuries and fatalities, you must report them based on the person type, including operators, other transit workers, and other. The same rows and columns will appear in the non-physical assaults table. All of the SNS safety form would not fit on one slide, so here's a screenshot of the bottom portion, which includes all other reportable safety and security data. The columns may be familiar if you completed an NTD report in the past. Previously, we only collected a summary of the event counts, fatality counts, and injury counts, but now you report them based on the event types listed on the left. Again, the types include collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, collisions with other major events, which again are non-collision events that meet a reporting threshold. The last row represents total reportable injury, which stem from non-major events. Now we will discuss the Federal Funding Allocation Statistics, or FFA-10 form. As Lee mentioned earlier, this year agencies will not be allowed to access their FFA-10 forms until the B15 and RR20 forms are saved and validated. Please note, if you do not operate demand response service, you will not have a B15 form, and the FFA-10 form will be available once you save and validate your RR20 form. This eliminates the need to go back and forth entering data on the FFA-10 form. On this form, you will report vehicle revenue miles, hours, ridership, and operating expenses, broken down by each UCA you serve. You will complete one FFA-10 form for each mode. The UCAs will populate based on your agency's B10 form. If you provide service within one UCA or one non-UCA, you will report all of your service to that area. If you operate in more than one area, you will report all data statistics for that route to the UCA or non-UCA that is primarily served. Or you can allocate the statistics proportionally to the UCAs and non-UCAs served. For further information on serve rules and allocating to different UCAs, please refer to the NTD Serve rules beginning on page 142 of the policy manual. Before you begin allocating your data, you must select your UCA reporting method. There are three options: actual data, actual vehicle revenue miles, or other. For actual data, this means your agency tracks 100% of VRH, VRM, UPT, and OE between all UCAs that you serve. Actual vehicle revenue miles means that your agency only tracks VRM operated in each UCA. The system will then automatically allocate the remaining data points, such as VRH, UPT, and OE, based on the VRM data that you report. The last option, other, means your agency used another methodology to track data between UCAs, and you must describe this method. If you select actual data, you will need to manually enter the values for VRH, UPT, VRM, and OE into both UCA columns. If you select actual vehicle revenue miles, you will notice that the VRM line is the only editable field. This means you may only report VRM in each UCA. The other data points will automatically allocate after you enter the VRM. If you select, if you select the other allocation method, again, you provide a description. In this screenshot, you will see an example of an FFA10 form with one UCA. There's one column here to enter all of the data. In this screenshot, you will see an example of an FFA10 form with two UCAs. There are two columns for you to allocate all of your data between the UCAs. The far left column of the FFA10 form is titled Item. Here you will see each data point that you report: VRH, UPT, VRM, and operating expenses, or OE. Now we have reached our last annual form, the CEO certification, or D10 form. The first section of the D10 form is overall accuracy. Your CEO should confirm the accuracy of your NTD report. Next, your CEO will confirm that your agency reported data according to the NTD policy and USOA. The second section is the federal funding allocation data. Your CEO will review the criteria listed in options A through G and ensure the data meets these requirements. You will select yes or no for each mode and type of service operated. The third section is the financial data review. This section of the D10 pertains to the IASFD, or Independent Auditor Statement for Financial Data. You will first indicate whether or not you have an existing IASFD within the last 10 years. If you completed one last year or have one from the last 10 years, you will select yes to the first question and proceed to the next question. Please note that this every 10 years rule became a requirement in report year 2018. If you do not have an existing IASFD, you will indicate whether or not your agency has a waiver for the audit for the current report year, and that is only if you did not receive a waiver in the previous year. The last question, once you have done so, the last question will appear, and you can upload your newly completed IASD directly in the system. You will also need to report the date that it was completed and who it was completed by. If you have not completed your audit, you will select no to the first question, the first three questions, and then enter the anticipated completion date in the explanation box. This will allow you to explain why the audit has not been completed yet and when your agency expects to complete the audit. Lastly, you will review the unlinked passenger trip data section. Here you will select your data collection method. There are several methods, the most common being 100% counts of unlinked passenger trips. The other options are an alternative sampling method, the NTD sampling method, APC data, or none of the options listed, which you would provide a description for. Please note, most reduced reporters do not sample for UPT. If you are unsure what method to select, please consult your validation analyst for assistance. Once you have determined the method your agency uses, you will select a choice from the drop-down menu. If using any automatic passenger counters or APC data for UPT for your modes, you will need to select the Used APC checkbox. As Lee mentioned earlier, there's now a new section of the D10 form called General Transit Feed Specification. In this section, the CEO will be required to certify the agency's GTFS web links are up to date at the time of submission. Although you have completed all of your annual forms, you have not finished yet. Now we will cover how to submit your agency's annual NTD report once the forms are completed. Please note that completing the forms or completing the D10 form does not submit your report. Once your report is finalized, you will navigate to the report package summary page and select related actions. Please note that only the CEO or CEO delegate may submit the original submission, which is the first submission of the report. The NTD contact may submit all subsequent reports during the revision process. Once related actions is open, click on Submit Annual Report Package. If the report is complete and there are no outstanding issues with data, you will be able to confirm the report package by submission by clicking on Continue. Finally, to complete the submission process, you will click Submit. Once the report is submitted, you will receive a notification that says Action completed successfully. You can confirm that the package was submitted if the package is listed as in review rather than working data on the summary page. Lastly, we will cover the validation process and what happens with your report after you submit the original submission. Your assigned NTD validation analyst will validate your completed report for any deviations from the reporting requirements, missing data, or data irregularities. This includes whether the data fluctuated significantly from the prior year, or if any forms do not contain all of the necessary information, or if any data elements were reported to the incorrect field. Prior to submitting the report, agencies may take advantage of their resources to reduce the time dedicated to report validation. This includes contacting your validation analyst prior to submission so that they may review your data in advance. You may also refer to the report checklist included in your welcome packet, which contain common validation errors and other items to look for before submitting. It is typical for your report to go through a few revision cycles before being closed out. Your analyst will almost always return your original submission for data revisions or clarification. Once a report is ready to be sent to FTA for approval, it will either be sent as a clean closeout, which means there were no issues with the report, or it will be a closeout with issues, which means there were some outstanding issues that could not be resolved prior to the report closeout. The issues are cited in your closeout letter, and your agency will be expected to resolve them by the following report year. Looking ahead to the 2024 report year, you can expect a welcome email from your validation analyst as your due date approaches. This email will contain a packet containing helpful tips, as well as the reporter checklist. Your analyst will also provide guidance in completing, submitting, and validating the report until it is closed out. Please do not hesitate to contact your analyst with questions. Thank you very much for tuning in. Again, here's the email address for the FTA IT Help Desk and the NTD Help Desk. The NTD Help Desk is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will now open it up for questions.